It has been quite a while since I last made a video about Knights of the Old Republic, and I'm sure many of you have been looking forward to the next video, so here we are. Now, a few months ago I made another video about Darth Sion and whether or not he was in love with the female Jedi Exile Mistress Surik. By the end of that video, if you haven't seen it, go and check it out. After some analysing of the dialogue and some of the general themes of the game, I came to the conclusion that Darth Sion was indeed in love with the Jedi Exile to an extent. And it was this general love that ultimately allowed the Jedi Exile to break down Darth Sion's walls, not with physical strength, but with words and ideology. And through that, she essentially convinces Darth Sion to kill himself in a way. Now, at the end of that video, I also posed the idea that could this letting go that Darth Sion does at the end of the game be indicative of some kind of redemption arc? Could this moment actually be showing for the first time a Sith Lord that has kept himself alive through hatred actually basking within the light for a short moment of time, through essentially what is the power of love, as cliche as that may sound. Now, I know it has been a while since that video, but it is the question that I want to delve into today. Was Darth Sion redeemed upon his death at the end of Knights of the Old Republic 2? And I'm going to try and provide my own perspective and perhaps give some of you an answer to this that maybe you haven't heard before. So, first and foremost for this question, we need to define what redemption is, and then we need to further define what a redemption arc is in storytelling. So, in the English dictionary, there are two definitions for the word redemption that we need to look at in the context of this video. So, the first is the action or saving or being saved from sin, error, or evil. And although it's basically the same, the second definition is a thing that saves someone from error or evil. Now, to further that, a redemption arc by definition is a tiny little bit more complex. So I view a redemption arc as a core storytelling device in which an evil character or a villain who shows clear destructive, chaotic, evil tendencies by the end of the story offers to that story a grandiose moment in which they go against their nature and do something good that affects almost everything. Now, yes, you can have redemption arcs that are smaller in scale, but I do believe a true redemption arc needs to reverberate upon the outer layers of the story itself. So, the best example of this, especially in Star Wars, is of course none other than Darth Vader. The first movie introduces Darth Vader simply as the ominous villain. He is clearly evil, he doesn't really have any redeeming qualities, and that's the first part of the act of his redemption arc. The second movie then introduces more nuance to his character. It builds upon the relationship between him and the hero of the story. It gives us a reason to look at Darth Vader with a little bit more complexity than we did before. And it adds stakes not only to the villain, but to the hero himself. This can be considered the middle act of the story structure and the redemption arc in this regard. And then, by the third movie, which is the final act, this nuance is expanded upon significantly, and there's some very intricate moments in which we can see some emotional resonance from the villain. The relationship with the hero that was established in the second act has given our villain a reason to look a little bit more inwards, and by its conclusion, in the eyes of the audience, he selflessly sacrifices himself, not necessarily for the greater good, but for two specific reasons: to save his son and his family. Something that he failed to do miserably in his past, essentially atoning for his mistakes. And this sacrifice then has grander reverberations across the entirety of the story, giving the rebellion space to win the war, giving Luke the opportunity to finally become a Jedi like his father, and blah blah. And if we were to put this on paper, this comes out as a 3-act redemption arc, which is a lot more greatly expanded upon when you start to introduce the prequels and stuff like that, but the core concept of the redemption arc always stays the same. So now I've given you a good and clear example of a redemption arc in storytelling and in Star Wars itself, and how that redemption arc is structured and the definitions of what redemption implies. Can that be applied to Darth Sion in Knights of the Old Republic 2? So of course, for this video, I'm only going to consider the official storyline of Knights of the Old Republic 2, which is the female Jedi Exile, which is why I mentioned you should probably watch the video about Darth Sion being in love with her, because it connects to this video and adds greater context to this video too. Now, by the later stages of Knights of the Old Republic 2, our hero and one of these main antagonists come blow to blow, and in the initial stages of the battle, Darth Sion as a villain does what he always tries to do. He tries to dominate through brute strength. But he views the Jedi Exile as a beauty. And although he convinces himself that he hates beauty, he actually hates himself. But through that love that he has developed over the course of the game for the Jedi Exile, it is the only thing that he has felt beyond hate in a very long time. And he really doesn't like that. So in this moment, he believes that the only way to save the Jedi Exile from a fate that he has experienced, one of torment, one of suffering, of pain, of hatred, he tries to control and dominate the situation, and he basically wants to kill the Jedi Exile to preserve the love he has for her and the purity of her character in his eyes. But as many of us know, the purpose of this battle with Darth Sion is to not beat him physically. He is essentially unkillable. We literally can't kill his character, and we basically have to talk him to death. But as a female Jedi Exile, we can do something that Darth Sion hasn't had in a very long time. We can show him kindness, but not a kind of soppy kindness, a kindness that comes from confidence, from empathy and strength of character, rather than the strength that one wields, which is how he has always viewed strength up until this point in his entire life, as something to be wielded. Now this kindness slowly starts to break down Darth Sion's walls. We have to kill him several times before he actually starts to listen to the words of the Jedi Exile, rather than just projecting his own view onto her. And by the time that we do put him down for the final time, when he arises for the final time, these words begin to take significant effect, because he begins to realize that the Jedi Exile is not him. He has misconstrued self-hatred, beauty, strength, weakness, and he's basically blurred it all together. And through this conversation, it allows him to kind of view the Jedi Exile not from a selfish, inward perspective of who he is and who he became, but from the perspective of who she actually is as a human being. And it's her decisions, her choices, her actions that he realizes were basically almost the opposite to his. It's through her that he realizes in a positive way the true meaning of strength, a lesson that he almost totally failed to grasp underneath Krea's tutelage. Now, as I alluded to, initially in this battle he has two goals. One is to prove himself and prove to Krea that he is the strongest of the bunch, but at the same time, within that desire to beat the Jedi Exile is, as I said, to preserve her purity of character. But he realizes by the end of it, he can't control that. He realizes that the Jedi Exile's strength is totally the opposite of his, and this then leads to what is potentially the first time in his life where he could show a measure of that strength, where it was guided more by the ideology of the Jedi Exile, but has a kind of parity to how she does things. And the only reason he chooses to believe in this so much more than he did before is because of that love that he built for her. And this massive decision for the character is to make a choice that is truly his own. He has been a lapdog for Krea, he has been a lapdog for Revan, he was a lapdog for Exile Kun, he's been a lapdog for the Sith, and more importantly, he's been a lapdog for the dark side of the Force. And no matter what he did in the name of any of those things, it never gave him any fulfillment. It just continued to lead to more misery, to more pain, and he was basically just a slave to it. The Jedi Exile, on the other hand, is not a slave to anything. She's never been a slave to the things that she has served. She has made decisions that go against them on so many occasions, or as Kreia says, she believed in many ideals, but she was willing to betray them should they go against who she was as a person. So, in this final moment, not only does he make a choice for the first time in his life to stop serving something else but himself, he also chooses to trust the person that allowed him to view the galaxy in this way at the end. Two things that he hasn't done in pretty much forever, making his own choice and choosing to trust. But of course, in making this decision, it is very, very consequential because he decides to let go of his hatred, to let go of the dark side. And this results in his death. The dark side is no longer giving him power, the power to keep his body intact, and so he basically dissolves into nothingness and dies. And this moment, in my view, is a redemptive conclusion. He chose to let go of everything he feared to lose, and that was his own power. And in that, he allowed the Jedi Exile to complete her mission. It allowed her to become who she needed to be and to defeat Kreia. It allowed the Jedi to be reborn. It led to huge reverberations upon the grander story. And it was that decision by Darth Sion, that selfless decision, that allowed the conclusion of Knights of the Old Republic 2 to play out in the way that it did. Now, did he redeem himself in a way that allowed perhaps the light side to take him in? Well, if we look at Darth Vader as an example, why not? Darth Sion chose to let go of hatred and unfathomable power, and he basically selflessly saved the Jedi Exile from himself and died to do this. If we were to put that alongside Darth Vader in parallel, well, Darth Vader selflessly lets go of his power, basically saves Luke from the dark side and the Emperor, and he dies to do this. Side by side, if we are to look at that story structure, they are basically the same. The general context surrounding these stories is of course very different, but from a bird's eye view, from a general perspective, without those intricate nuances, the structure is very similar. Now, we're never going to get a definitive answer as to whether Darth Sion did in fact perhaps become one with the light, or perhaps the light embraced him at the end for a moment, which is something we did get to see Darth Vader do when he became one with the Force. But we can for certain say that the general story arc and the general redemptive structure is very similar. And if we are to consider one story as a redemption, then surely we have to consider the other one, as we've mentioned, that is very similar, to be a redemption too. So my view on this is yes, Darth Sion was indeed redeemed at the end of Knights of the Old Republic 2. And a part of me likes to believe that if the story was given a little bit more time to cook in the oven, as was intended with Darth Sion, maybe we would have seen a little bit more to this redemption arc, who knows? Totally conjecture, but it's interesting to play around with those kind of thoughts. Now, I do believe that Darth Sion is one of the most complex and intriguing characters in the entirety of Knights of the Old Republic 2. He just suffered from basically what every other character suffered from, a lack of exposition because so much of his story was cut. But if we look at the core of Darth Sion's story from the beginning to the end, there is a beautiful narrative in there, one that is at its core so unbelievably Star Wars. Because generally, Knights of the Old Republic 2 is considered to be a very unconventional, unorthodox Star Wars story. But it is funny because within that unconventional, unorthodox Star Wars story and within those character motivations, there can be found a conventional Star Wars story that tends to lean more towards the themes and ideas that George Lucas provided, if you do choose to go looking for it. Now, of course, at the end of the day, this is just my perspective of events. I am, just like everyone else, I put the puzzle pieces together and I paint my own picture and come to my own conclusion on how events in this story unfold. And in regards to this specific question, this is how I ultimately believe it did conclude for Darth Sion's character on a slightly deeper level than surface. But as always, with these kind of videos and with these kind of topics, I would absolutely love to know what you think in regards to it. Do you think that by the conclusion of Knights of the Old Republic 2, Darth Sion did indeed have some kind of redemption arc? Or do you believe something else happened? Let me know in the comment section below, because I really want to see what you guys have to say on this one. As always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps me out a great deal. Star Wars content on YouTube as of late has been performing diabolically, and it really does need its own kind of redemption arc, and you guys can help with that. And if you haven't, perhaps consider subscribing to join what is the biggest growing Knights of the Old Republic community on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.